Network Dojo.
Hey, Jeff Rensink here from Network Dojo, and we are in a series talking about passing the CCIE Enterprise Wireless Lab with Network Dojo. Part 2 here, so if you haven't seen the first part, I encourage you to watch that. But just a quick overview of what we're talking about in this series. We're having a 4-video series here walking through what makes Network Dojo training system so great. And so the last video we talked about how training for the CCIE is like a journey. It's a long journey, traveling across a country, or if your country is a little small, traveling across a continent. It's this long journey. It's going to take a long time, a lot of effort, but the training system that you use is meant to make that journey easier and increase the odds of even getting to the end of that journey, which for this would be achieving your CCIE. And so in the last video, we talked about how the raw materials that we use for our training, being the workbooks, the videos, you could consider quizzers, kind of the raw training materials that have the big information to them, that kind of gives us smooth roads or good paths to follow as we make our journey. We move from the old Oregon Trail days where we're crossing the country with a horse and carriage. We don't really have roads, but people have traveled the path before, but it's going to be really bumpy, it's going to be really tough, and there's a high chance that you're probably not going to get there. 2, moving into more of a modern age where we actually have a working road system to follow along. Some roads might be better than other roads. There's still going to be tough parts. You might have to traverse mountains and have inclement weather that you have to deal with, but we have a much better paths to walk or to travel across. And so that our workbooks, our videos, the raw materials moves us into more of that modern age for our journey to getting the CCIE. So in this video, we're going to talk about the vehicle you use for that journey. So we're going to kind of continue on with this metaphor of a journey. So when we talk about the CCIE, it's definitely a different beast compared to all of the other Cisco certification exams that you need to take. And really the big unique thing about the CCIE is that practical exam. We have this hands-on exam where you have to prove that you know how to configure things. You can understand things, you can troubleshoot things, and you can do this all very efficiently because we have this time limitation with a lot of work to do with inside of it. And so you need to be able to make things work. And so while all the raw materials from before give you better roads to traverse, in order to prepare ourselves for this practical exam, we need to actually build those skills to actually do the things that the lab needs us to do, right? And so that's where practice is going to come into play. And so if you don't have the ability to practice all of these things that you're learning about in the videos and that the workbook would want to walk you through, you may as well try to be walking across an entire continent. You're not going to make it, right? So we need a vehicle, and the vehicle is our practice. And so what are we going to practice on? We need equipment. We need servers to practice on, right? And so having the ability to practice on real gear, which is what you're going to be doing things on in the lab, allows you to actually traverse the roads to your destination. It gives you that vehicle so that you can actually make your way from one side of the journey to the end. So what are your practice options in terms of studying for the CCIE? Well, there's a few. Number 1, when we talk about Network Dojo, you can rent racks from us. So, we have racks for you to practice everything that you would ever need to practice on. So that's definitely one place where you could build those skills up. You could create your own dedicated home rack or work rack, just depending on where it's actually located. And you could study everything on your own gear and not really use our racks. You could have sometimes like a shared work rack, so sometimes you don't get the benefit of having your own dedicated gear. Sometimes you need to split that gear up between multiple people having access to that gear, or sometimes it's maybe lab gear for customers at your work, but sometimes you can do some of your own things on top of it, but it's not dedicated just for you, and it's not dedicated just for CCIE studies. It might be for something else, but you're able to use it a little bit. That's sometimes a scenario that some people at their works are allowed to have. And then sometimes we use like a hybrid approach where you're going to use our racks for some things, and then you might have your own home or work rack for other things. Those are kind of the main categories of practicing that we have available to us. So let's talk about using our Network Dojo racks. When we say using our, I'm talking Network Dojo here. With any solution, there's always positives and negatives. There's no one solution that's just completely positives and no negatives to it. Otherwise, we wouldn't even talk about any other solutions, right? So let's talk about the positives of using our racks. And I believe this is the superior option here. But first and foremost, all of our workbooks that you're going to be using in your studies are based off of our racks. And so when we ask you to do things in the workbooks, the racks are perfectly built to follow along with that. There's no alterations to the workbook exercises that you would need to do like you would have to do on your own home racks. You get the benefit of automation on our lab loads. So part of every lab is getting the hardware or the servers to the beginning state to do that lab. And oftentimes, sometimes we have to, erase configs that we did before, apply new configs, and this is the same as if you had a home rack too. I mean, you did something on it before. Maybe that's not the starting state you need to do the next lab that you want to do. And so with our racks, you can just say, hey, set me up for this lab. Boom, you walk away. 15 minutes later, it's all good to go. Or you can tell the racks, hey, this is what I want to start in at the beginning of my session, and it'll do that for you. Whereas with your own gear, you have this manual process, and you're probably not building scripts. Most people I know don't have scripts to automate this process for it. So it's a manual process. Every time you want to start over and get to a certain starting state. You're going to save, honestly, a ton of money. When you look at the blueprint for the CCIE Enterprise Wireless Lab, it's very expensive, honestly. So we have to be dealing with newer switches because we need to be able to support SD access. And so you're going to be needing, at a minimum, some 3650 series switches. You're going to need at least the 9300 series switch, and those aren't cheap. You're going to need some controllers to run new code, so you're spending at least $1,000 a pop just to get something like a 3504 series controller. You're going to need some new APs. You're going to need a beefy ESX server if you want to have any shot at running DNA Center. I mean, DNA Center itself is crazy expensive if you were to buy it, but there's alternate means to run DNA Center on your own ESXi box, but again, it needs to be a very beefy box, so I don't think you're going to be able to get a box for cheaper than $4,000 that can possibly run DNA Center. So there's a lot of money. So all of our racks, you're going to spend at least 20 grand at the low end to replicate what it is that we're doing, and then potentially more, just depending on where you are in the world. That would be prices based off of a lot of used gear in the United States. I know different locations in the world, unfortunately, have higher costs associated with acquiring some of this gear. You got to add in the cost of powering up everything, cooling down everything, because this gear kicks out a bunch of heat. Potentially cost of replacing failed units. So if you're doing your own gear and something breaks, you got to replace it. If one of our pieces of gear breaks, we replace it, right? So you're saving a ton of money not having to do all that stuff. And when you think about, okay, well, when you buy the Platinum bundle through us or the Platinum Plus bundle through us, and you're getting 250, 350 hours of rack practice there, you're getting a lot of use for not a ton of money comparatively to building your own gear out. You're going to save a bunch of time not having to set up your own racks, maintaining your own racks. It takes a long time, honestly, to build this all up. And even if you have the starting blueprint to use, okay, I'm going to replicate what you're doing there, you have the time it takes to acquire everything. You have the time it takes to get everything at the proper code levels, the time it takes to figure out what your starting configs need to be, to get some initial configurations going on your Windows 10 VM, your Windows 2016 server, and all the services that it provides: Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, certificate authority services, and then just basically initial setups of all the other servers out there. It is a hefty time investment just to get started with your practices. That's all work before you even can start practicing at all. And then it's going to be taking up space, just depending on your space requirements. The noise that it creates, the amount of power it draws. Do you have enough circuits to power this all up without constantly tripping things? All things to not have to worry about when you use our racks. Now the negatives. It's not all wonderful in perfectness. So you do have to schedule the racks. They're not just sitting there waiting for you to jump onto at a moment's notice, and so you have to be able to think 1 to 2 hours ahead of time to know, okay, I'm going to need a rack. Let's go ahead and reserve a rack for a certain time period. there's a chance that your rack might not be available when you want it. Now we try to keep that scenario as low possibility as possible without going too crazy with having tons of racks. So most of the time you shouldn't have a problem getting a rack when you need it. So it's not very often that our racks are 100% booked. We try to keep that scenario low. And then it's not super convenient for just quick, short little things. Maybe you just want to spin something up and just test a couple of commands. Well, yeah, you can schedule a rack, but you have to schedule them in hour increments. And so if you only have 5 minutes of work, well, then you just sort of burn the rest of that time. So it's not as convenient for short little things like that. Your configs are not saved across sessions. And so if you come to the end of your session and you want to continue working on, we do give you the ability to try to extend your session, but that's not always possible just due to your own scheduling or the availability of the racks. So if you need to, sort of pick up where you left off, you can't really do that on our racks. You'll have to redo some of those configurations, whereas you don't have that problem on your own home gear. It's not super cost effective if you just want to sort of have gear available while you watch video. So one of the study methodologies that someone might have is, okay, let's watch a video about this topic. And as I'm watching the video, I can kind of practice these commands while I'm watching it kind of in real time there. It's not super efficient to do that because it would just take so much time, rack rental time to do that, and you have to pay for rack rental time, right? It's a finite resource that you would then have to pay more money to get more time eventually. So home labs, perfect for that. Rack rentals, not the most ideal solution for that. And then it's not as flexible as your own setup. It's locked into a certain topology, locked into certain codes, only certain devices are in there. Whereas if you're building your own home rack, not only could you use it for CCIE studies, but you could use it for other stuff too. And so you can kind of tweak it as you deem fit. Can't really do that on our racks. All right, so comparing this to only using your own rack, which is a solution that really no one is probably gonna do in this version of the lab, but let's talk about it real quick. Positives, you can make it whatever you want. So you can build that rack out to be 100% replica of what I have, or whatever it is that makes the most amount of sense to you. It's always available to you, assuming that things aren't breaking. And if you want to be able to access it remotely, that you've figured out some sort of a remote access setup there. You've got the proper tools to power things up, power things down when you don't want to use them. But as long as you can figure all that stuff out, absolutely, it's always available to you when you want to use it. You can leave it in any state that you want, start back up at any time, so you can stop your studies, come back the next day, and it's already still there. You don't have to redo things over and over again. And I do give you the initial configurations to follow along the workbook exercises. And so you can do a lot of our workbook exercises, at least workbook 1 for sure, on your own gear. You might need to make some slight alterations if you have a different topology than what I have, but at least you can do a lot of it on your own gear there. So definitely, I try to set things up to make it as easy to use your own gear if you so choose to do that. But the downside of using only your racks and not using my racks for anything is, number one, it's going to cost a lot when you start adding in the ability to support DNA Center and SD access. That's where the real expensive stuff definitely starts coming inside there. It takes a lot of work to get everything ordered, get everything set up, so it's a lot of money, it's a lot of time. You have to deal with all the headaches of managing everything when things break, replacing it. Something's not working quite right, you got to figure it out on your own. And if you want to do our workbook labs, again, workbook 1 you can kind of do on your own racks fairly easily, but when you get into things like workbook 2, workbook 3, while I do give you the initial hardware configurations, I can't really give you the initial VM configurations. And so oftentimes there are custom configs on those VMs that you just can't really replicate on your own rack. So doing workbook 2, at least some of workbook 2, and then the workbook 3 exercises becomes a lot harder to do on your own racks if you want to follow along with my stuff, which is really the whole point of the training solution, right? Follow along with my stuff. So using a hybrid approach really becomes kind of the most reasonable solution if you want to use your own gear for certain things. So you're not going to use it for everything, but you'll use it for certain things. And so when we talk about using a hybrid approach, what you're probably going to do is you're going to use our racks for a lot of it. Definitely workbook 2, workbook 3, you're going to use our racks. Workbook 1, you'll sort of split the difference between, okay, I'll do some of this on my rack, I'll do some of it on your rack, or you could just do all of the workbook stuff on our racks too. And then you can have something locally for like the quick things. I just want to do something really quick. or I want to have some gear available while I watch some videos, so rack rental is not great for that, but home lab, perfect for something like that. Or, hey, you know what, for whatever reason, there wasn't a rack available for me to rent this day, so I do still have some stuff at my home or at my work where I could actually work through some of this stuff. And it doesn't need to be a really big lab if this is the approach that you're going to take. So you could just have some very basic switches, some just layer 3 switches that provide PoE. You can get these for less than $100 a piece. A controller, either a real one, ideally if you could have a 3504 controller, perfect. Those are like $1,000 at the cheapest end of things. But you could buy like a 2504 controller for dirt cheap. Yeah, you can't run 8.10 code, but you can do almost everything with 8.5 code. So you could still get, buy really cheap there, or you could run a virtual wireless LAN controller and at least have some 8.10 code, but live with the limitations of a virtual wireless LAN controller. I guess you get a few APs. They don't need to be anything special, although maybe one of them that can support Mobility Express, and your cheapest Mobility Express option would be an 1830 or 1850 series APs. You could probably get those for maybe just a couple $100 at this point in time, and everything just keeps on getting cheaper as time moves on. And then an ESXi server, we're not going to worry about DNA Center, but something basic that could run, a Windows server, Prime, CMX, ICE. You don't have to spend a lot of money to get a used server that can run those types of things. And so you could get by for less than $1,000 if you really wanted to cut corners, definitely less than $2,000, and you can have a robust home lab that you could do a lot of individual practice on. And then again, you're still using our racks for the bulk of the heavy lifting of your studies there. Because when you buy the Platinum bundle or the Platinum Plus bundle, which is really our full programs within those, you're going to get at least 250 hours for the Platinum bundle, and in the Platinum Plus bundle you get 350 hours. So the idea is that you're going to be able to do pretty much everything on our racks if you want. And again, you're just going to supplement on your own home racks. So when you use our racks, what are you getting with us? What makes them so big and expensive? Well, you're getting 8 switches. The topology in this new lab is big. It's bigger than what we had in any previous versions of the wireless CCIE. And so you're going to get a mixture of 3650 series switches and 9300 series switches. And both of these models support SD access. We just need those 9300s to do some of the bigger, heavy lifting parts of the SD access solution there. You're going to get 5 standalone controllers. 3 of them are 3504s, all running 8.10 code. You also get a virtual wireless LAN controller and a standalone 9800 cloud-based controller. And then on top of that, the 9300s support the embedded 9800 controller. So you're getting all the controller possibilities that you would need to, number one, practice everything and do everything that the lab might call you to do. We have a mixed bag of APs, including 3700 series APs, which are important because there are things that are supported on those that aren't supported on the other ones. We have 1800 series APs, we have 3800 series APs, and the new AX 9115 series APs. And in the lab calls out specifically 3700s, 1850s, 3800s, 9115s. So we're doing, using the models that are going to show up in the lab. And then we have all of the VMs that the lab is going to supply. So a Windows 10 client, a Windows 2016 server with lots of services running on top of it. We actually have 2 different ICE servers, a Prime server, CMX server, and that DNA Center server inside of there. So again, you're going to be able to practice everything that you need to practice in the actual lab. And to top it all off, we're set things up so that you're accessing the gear in the same way that you're accessing the gear in the real lab, which is kind of important because you want to try to replicate as much as you can the experience of the lab. And if you replicate how we access things in the lab, then that's not a stumbling block to you come lab. When you're used to accessing things in a completely separate way, that's just something that's going to slow you down in the lab as you get used to this different method here. So we want to try to eliminate as many barriers and as many new things that you would experience in the lab. So we want you to experience as much as you can ahead of time, and that's just going to make you more prepared. So kind of going back to our journey metaphor. Now we have the raw materials, which is what we talked about in the last video. That's our workbooks, our videos, our quizzers. This gives you the nicer roads to traverse. With this video, we talk about our racks giving you, it's almost like having a rental car delivered to you anytime you need it. That is specially customized to deal with the roads and conditions of the day. And so whatever lab you're trying to work your way through, it is equipped 100% to allow you to complete that lab, to traverse whatever section of road that you need to traverse, because sometimes the roads are flat, sometimes they're hilly, sometimes you're going through a mountain, sometimes it's a rainy day, a snowy day, whatever it's going to be, a windy day. And so the idea is that the vehicle can handle all of the paths, all of the labs that you're going to be called upon to do, so that you can practice everything you need to do and get yourself to the end of that journey. And so now you've got the roads to follow, you've got the vehicle to drive, you're ready to take that journey. The next question that we're going to address in the next video is going to be, how are you going to navigate that journey? So be sure to look out for part number 3, and we will talk about that.